A half-century ago, they were hunted down, rounded up, and taken from their parents. Dozens of Doukhobor children who were forced into residential schools by the government of British Columbia. Now, 49 of them are suing the province for what happened. And what happened continues to haunt them to this day. Here's an encore presentation of a documentary by Dan Bjarnason.
The tranquility of this lovely valley is haunted by dark and ugly stories. Now a senior citizens' home in the Kootenays in British Columbia, a half-century ago, it was a gulag for Doukhobor children. Many have come back here to New Denver for the first time since their release in 1959. Anguish is still carved in their faces. They were not students here, but inmates. Torn from their parents' arms in police raids, they are now determined to tell their dreadful stories. It's been almost 50 years since the Doukhobor children were locked up at this detention camp in British Columbia, but the pain is as searing today as it was then. Utterly innocent children were in effect kidnapped by their government and used as a pawn in a battle between their parents and the state. They were members of the Sons of Freedom, a sect of Doukhobors, pacifists who fled Tsarist Russia in the 1880s and found refuge in what they assumed would be a tolerant Canada. They were a rural agrarian people who lived close to the land and essentially wanted to be left alone. The Sons of Freedom were suspicious of all governments, and governments were suspicious of them. Sons of Freedom extremists protested in the nude. Some were convicted of arson and bombings, so all Sons of Freedom members were suspect. The government and the sect were on a collision course. Education was a flashpoint. The Sons of Freedom believed the public school system would brainwash children into blindly obeying the state. They insisted on their own schools, and the scene was set for the tragedy to come. Peter Ellisoff and Nick Cadigan both were Doukhobor fathers of school-aged children as the crisis approached in the 1950s. All the parents wanted, says Ellisoff, was for the curriculum to reflect some of the Doukhobor values.
Doukhobors were never against ABC or 1, 2, 3. Doukhobors were never against education, never. But they were against the patriotism. Mostly it taught patriotism, and patriotism is swallowed by guns. And that is
exactly.
In the early 1950s, the BC government came up with a brainstorm: take the kids from their homes and send them to government-run detention centers. However, even back then there were warnings that the government scheme was dangerous. In this 1952 internal memo, a consultant warned that removing the kids from their homes would cause emotional problems and result merely in the production of a neurotic Doukhobor for a non-educated one. But the newly elected Social Credit government ignored such warnings and in September 1953 made its move. To Shirley Schertzabitoff, that dreadful day remains a vivid scene in her mind.
I can still see the police coming up the road. It's never left me. We were all in the prayer tent, and as the police entered, my stepfather got hit on the head. I saw blood splatter, and we tore through the tent and into the bush.
Mike Varigan was 5 years old.
At that time, my whole world fell apart, and I learned about extreme fear. My auntie ended up being clubbed across the face and ended up in hospital. My mother was taken to jail. My sister was taken to be hidden in a different village, and I ended up with approximately half a dozen other kids hiding in the mountains, hiding from the RCMP.
148 were arrested that day. 28 would be sent to prison for 3 years for being nude. The Mounties also grabbed 104 children, the first inmates exiled to New Denver, a harrowing little universe devised especially for them. News that their children were being grabbed raced through the Doukhobor communities. Desperate families sent some kids off into mountain hideouts for months. Others were moved from farm to farm, hidden in cellars, in cupboards, in barns, in haystacks. Joe Schuster-Beatoff hid from the Mounties under some hay.
I can't understand how a human being could look for a kid with a pitchfork in a haystack. Because I was under the haystack, and I could hear the pitchfork hitting the boards. I don't know how to describe it.
In the biggest raid in January 1955, children learned they could not hide forever.
After hiding for a year and a half, I was reunited with my family in the village of Kristova. And at age 7 in 1955, 70 RCMP officers raided the village. They came in dozens of police cars with school buses. What I remember from that raid is 3 RCMP officers coming into my home. My mother fainted, and as I was taken away, my last image was my mother lying on the floor, and myself, I didn't know whether she was alive or dead.
Fred Conkin remembers the day the Mounties came and dragged him out from under his bed.
So then he took his billy club and he pushed it up against my belly, really hard. And I cried out, and then he said something else, and I didn't understand what he was saying. So then he grabbed me by my hair and he pulled me out. He picked me up, and my mom was yelling my name. And she wanted to hug me, and he hit her with a billy club. And then he took me to the car, threw me in the back seat, and
That was almost a half century ago, and you describe it in detail like it happened 10 minutes ago.
I'll never forget it.
As with most of the kids, Irene Elisoff was at home with her mother when the raids began.
It was brown with policemen all over for 2 kids. And cars all over, and Mom screaming, "Irene, the police are here." And so she's trying to pull me away, and they're saying, "You'd better put something in the suitcase for her, because, you know, she's being taken away." I didn't know where, what I did wrong.
Peter Elisoff and Nick Cadigan, now in their 80s, still rage at the inhumanity that cost them their children.
I have to bring the words of the Mountie that told me this. He said, "Peter, if you was doing this to me, I'd have shot you." I still can't understand how a person, when he's got that feeling, what he expects me to do. You know, stand there, and I stood there, and I thought, "Dear God, there's got to be an end to this."
But it was only the beginning. At first glance, New Denver looked like a summer camp. But it was a no-nonsense institution where school-aged children were kept away from their families against their will. There was no pretense this was a home, it was confinement. They saw their parents for 1 hour, twice a month. Life was regimented and regulated by strict rules enforced by tough matrons in starched uniforms. It brings back chilling memories.
my God, this, I don't like this. So my bed was over here somewhere, Lisa.
I think it was further down.
The children should have never happened. It was abuse of the worst kind. No, I was over here somewhere in the middle, I was. It's the lights are out, go to bed, the lights are on, get up. Nobody to even take your hand, to give you a hug.
We were first assigned numbers. These numbers were sewn onto our clothes and on our shoes. It also identified our area within the dorm. We had roll call every 2 hours. We would have a horn blow, and we would have to line up for roll call, and they would do a head count to make sure that all the kids were there. And in the meantime, the fence was patrolled by our CMP officers all the time.
Like you were in a penitentiary.
Just like a prison. It was a prison atmosphere.
To like younger brothers?
Irene Shushnoff remembers the sobbing in the night.
Kids would have any idea?
Sometimes you're just falling asleep and you hear somebody whimpering, and you wonder whether they're sick or whether they're just lonely or whatever. Then you hear somebody else whimpering, and before you know it, you're crying also, and it just goes on and on and on like a wave, from one cubicle or from one bed to the next.
There were a few voices of dissent, privately warning about what was being done to the Doukhobor children. The province's social welfare branch said that removing the children from their homes was not about education, but was rather an attack on religious beliefs and culture. But publicly, school officials painted a picture of a make-believe world, a universe removed from the cruel reality.
The New Denver Dormitory is just like any other well-run private school in Canada. Children are clothed and fed and cared for, in this case at government expense. Corporal punishment is rarely used in the dormitory or in the school, and is probably less used in this school than in any other school in Canada.
I talked after lights out. And the matron caught me at it and she said, "You want to stay up?" Says, "I'll make sure you stay up all night." And she brought me to the bathroom and stood me in the shower stall. And whenever I'd start falling asleep, she'd come over and strap me.
Well, if you spoke Russian, you got strapped. I got strapped. I forgot to put my jeans in the laundry, and that was later on already. I got strapped. You got out of bed in the morning before the lights were on. You got strapped. For picking apples, we got strapped.
My dad worked in a sawmill in Silverton. On Wednesdays, he would go to New Denver to do some grocery shopping. There was one afternoon I did see him. I ran out, did get a hug from him. Next thing I know, there's the guard at the guard shack. Ran out, grabbed me, took me to the matron's office, and I was strapped for seeing my dad during non-visiting hours.
Parents protested outside the legislature and bombarded politicians with pleas to get their children back. They offered to compromise 4 public school days in exchange for 1 day dedicated to their Doukhobor teachings.
We were ready to do that. We had a meeting to that effect, and the people agreed to that, and they sent us the delegates to Victoria. We tried. We tried everything. We wanted to make peace. No, that was just shoved down our throat. You got to do just as I say.
For the government, in no mood to make a deal, compromise was not in the cards.
That's not what they had in their mind at all. No. The government want total disintegration. That's what we're talking about, genocide.
They wanted to break our backs, and that's all.
That's all.
When we return, the young captives of New Denver. More than 4 decades later, here at New Denver, one of the most haunting memories is of a cold, sterile place, beautiful but utterly without love. A place where food brought by a Doukhobor mother would be pilfered by the staff.
I said, "That's my watermelon. Mom brought that." And they said, "Irene, we didn't take it all. It's all right." And I said, "No, it's not all right. It's not yours. It's a treat for me."
If there is a single symbol of the sheer steel-fisted inhumanity of the place, it is the chain-link fence. A fence the children themselves were forced to build. A fence that kept the kids in and the parents out. If there was anything that mocked the claim that New Denver was other than a prison, it was that fence.
First of all, I couldn't believe it. And then I finally dawned on me how total it can get. How totally these people are going out to subdue. That you cannot even kiss your own child.
For Linda Essex and her sister Irene Shushnoff, those visits at the fence were heartbreaking.
Mom touching the fingers of the little kids because their fingers hung on the fence as they're trying to kiss. And everybody's trying to kiss each other really quickly so everybody gets a kiss. And then Mom patting the fingers.
When my parents came, we talked. They told me everything that happened at home. I used to have a dog when I was taken away, and they tell me about my dog, and I'd tell them how much I wanted to go home.
Visits could be canceled without warning, for unfinished homework, for misbehavior or illness. Some children went for more than a month without a visit.
They just tell you Irene can't go to visitation. She had mumps or measles or chicken pox. I mean, for years you didn't hug your mom. Dan?
Can you imagine mother trying to kiss a child through a fence? And the fence was this big? Can you imagine that? Can you imagine?
What kind of impact did this have on the mothers once the kids had gone? The mothers must have been...
There was 4 of us.
I don't want to go into this.
Now there's only 2 of us. His wife is gone and my wife is gone. They were compassionate mothers.
I'm going to break down.
Now they're not here. And that had very big effect on them, on their health.
Tell me about that. You mean it was so dreadful, this experience, that it affected their health for the rest of their lives?
Definitely.
Yes.
Definitely.
Finally, one summer's day in 1959, the Doukhobor children were taken to a bus stop and sent home. Their parents, unable to bear the pain any longer, after 7 years, had capitulated and agreed to send their kids to public schools. Today, New Denver stands for everything Canada feels it does not stand for now. Rights ignored, intolerance tolerated, assimilation forced on people wishing to be different or simply left alone.
Well, they wanted to destroy a type of a culture, didn't they? And they did it through children.
Take the Doukhobors through 3 generations of schooling, and they won't be Doukhobors anymore. And that was their intention.
They were not, as the government hoped, made into better citizens. They felt they were that already. Instead, they were to grow into wounded adults with a high divorce rate, several suicides, many struggle with alcoholism, all have their own demons.
I feel no love. I feel I can't love anybody. I'm okay with animals, but I don't like people.
I look at the other fathers who never experienced this, the way they treat their kids, and the way I treat my kids. I think I'm damaging my kids to a certain point because I don't give them love because I never experienced any love. I cannot give love. I mean, some people don't understand that. When you're locked up like that, you sort of lose it. You cannot give love, even to your wife, the right way.
2 years ago, in the first whisper of justice, British Columbia's ombudsman condemned what had happened to the Doukhobor children and declared the government owes them an unqualified apology and restitution. But in the time since that report, the government has taken precisely no action. So today, a group of 49 of the New Denver alumni declared it's time and launched a class action suit. Lawyer Drew Schroeder.
The motive of the government was to bring the parents to heel. They took the children away and punished the children in order to punish the parents. That's what they did, and it's wrong today. It was wrong in 1950. It's always been wrong.
But those in this room want to go further. They demand a public inquiry into what they regard as their kidnapping by the state.
I don't care if the thing was paved in gold. And not all of it was bad. And not every matron was a whore. There was some that at least cared a bit. What happened was not right. It should be acknowledged to the Canadian people that what happened in this country to a group of innocent kids. We apologize for it, we acknowledge it, and we compensate for their loss of, if you can, for their loss of childhood.
Doukhobors came to this country fleeing repression and expecting to find a compassionate and tolerant haven. Instead, many lost their children. Desperate mothers pleaded then, how could this have happened?
Heavenly Father, gracious and loving, guide us thy children.
Hey, you wanna do that?
Today, those children are still waiting for an answer. For The National, I'm Danby Arneson in New Denver, British Columbia.
The people you just saw in that documentary are due to get their day in court in January 2003.